Hey guys, tonight we are venturing deep into the humid embrace of the ancient Mesoamerican rainforest. Imagine, if you will, the air thick enough to drink, a symphony of unseen creatures serenading you from the emerald canopy above, and the rich, loamy scent of earth and untold botanical wonders rising with every slow, deliberate step. We're going back in time, not just a few centuries, but a couple of millennia, to understand how the ancient Maya cultivated and consumed a drink so precious it was literally the food of the gods, chocolate. Or, well, their version of chocolate. Let's be honest, if you were suddenly plunked down in a Maya village expecting a Hershey's bar, you probably wouldn't survive the shock of what they actually offered. The reality was often bitter, spicy, and a far cry from the sweet treat we know today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, feel free to type your location and current time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from, ready to drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey into the world of Maya chocolate, or cacao as they knew it, doesn't begin in a neatly cultivated plantation, nor in a bustling marketplace. No, it begins much deeper, in the very heart of the wild, untamed rainforest. You're stepping softly now, trying to make your way through the dense undergrowth, the air clinging to you like a warm, damp cloak. The sunlight struggles to penetrate the thick canopy far above, creating a dim, almost ethereal world of green and brown, punctuated by the sudden, vibrant flash of a macaw's wing, or the jewel-like gleam of a poisoned dart frog. Best not to touch that one, by the way. This is the ancestral home of the cacao tree, Theobroma cacao, a name given to it by a much later botanist, Carl Linnaeus, but one that beautifully captures its ancient reverence. Theo meaning God, and broma meaning food. The food of the gods. And for the Maya, it truly was. You push aside a broad, waxy leaf, its surface beaded with condensation, and there it is. Not a towering giant of the forest, but a rather modest understory tree, perhaps 15-20 feet tall, seeking the dappled shade provided by its taller, more robust neighbours. Unlike your average houseplant that throws a fit if you look at it sideways, cacao trees were surprisingly discerning about their real estate. They thrived in the warm, humid and well-drained soils found in these lowland rainforests, typically below an elevation of about 1,000 feet. They needed that consistent moisture, that protection from harsh, direct sun, and the rich organic matter provided by the endlessly decaying leaves and fallen branches on the forest floor. Look closely at its trunk and you'll see something quite peculiar. The cacao pods, these incredible vessels of future delight, don't just hang demurely from the branches like apples or pears. No, these are rather ostentatious. They sprout directly from the trunk and the larger, older branches, a phenomenon botanists call cauliflory. These pods are quite striking, ranging in colour from vibrant greens and yellows to rich reds and deep purples as they mature, their shapes elongated and somewhat football-like, or perhaps more like a ridged, oversized almond. Each pod, you notice, is a treasure chest, holding within its thick, leathery husk anywhere from 20 to 60 precious beans, all nestled in a sweet, white, mucilaginous pulp. Historians still argue whether the very first humans to interact with cacao were drawn to the beans themselves, or, more likely, to this surprisingly delicious pulp surrounding them. Imagine stumbling upon one of these pods, perhaps one broken open by a falling branch or a curious animal. That sweet, slightly tangy pulp would have been an immediate source of hydration and sugary energy in the often challenging environment of the rainforest. It's even thought that animals, like monkeys, might have been the original connoisseurs of cacao, feasting on the pulp and discarding the bitter beans. It's a charming, if slightly unhygienic, image, to think of our primate cousins as the first accidental chocolatiers, inadvertently spreading cacao seeds far and wide. They probably weren't too concerned with fair trade certification back then, just the sweet reward. The journey of this wild fruit into a cornerstone of Maya civilization is a long and somewhat hazy one, stretching back perhaps as far as 1900 BCE with the Olmec civilization, often considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Evidence of cacao residue has been found in Olmec pottery from sites like San Lorenzo, suggesting they too were enjoying some form of cacao beverage. The Maya, inheritors of much Olmec wisdom, undoubtedly took this appreciation to entirely new levels, elevating cacao from a mere forage treat to a sacred substance, a cultivated crop, and a vital component of their rituals, economy, and daily life, at least for some. You can almost feel the reverence they must have held for these unassuming trees, hidden away in the deeper parts of the forest. Finding a wild cacao grove would have been like discovering a divine secret. The Maya believed that the cacao tree was a gift from the gods, often specifically associated with deities like Ekchua, the god of merchants and cacao, or even the maize god, who, according to some myths, brought cacao to humanity from the mountain of sustenance. It wasn't just a plant, it was a direct link to the sacred, a symbol of life, fertility, and power. Of course, these ancient trees didn't come with a USDA organic sticker, but they were about as pure as it gets, nurtured by the rainforest itself, untouched by artificial anything. The gentle patter of rain on the leaves above, the distant call of a howler monkey, the scent of damp earth. This was the cathedral where the first glimmers of chocolate story began to unfold. A story whispered on the humid breeze, long before it became the global phenomenon it is today. The very air here feels ancient, laden with secrets, and you, standing amidst these sacred trees, are just beginning to sense the profound connection the Maya had with this divine nectar. Now, imagine yourself not just a curious wanderer, but someone with purpose, part of a community deeply intertwined with these cacao groves. The initial discovery in the wild, that serendipitous moment of tasting the sweet pulp, eventually evolved into a more deliberate and careful engagement with the cacao tree. While some cacao continued to be foraged from the wild, particularly in the early stages of its adoption, the Maya understood the value of this precious resource and began to cultivate it in managed groves or gardens, often intercropped with other beneficial plants. You're moving with a certain practiced ease now, your eyes scanning for the telltale signs of mature pods, a skill honed over years, perhaps generations. It's not just about spotting a tree, it's about understanding its cycles, its needs, its subtle communications. The cultivation of cacao was no simple affair, demanding patience and a deep understanding of the plant's particular requirements. Remember that need for shade. Young cacao saplings were especially vulnerable to direct sunlight and dry conditions. So, Maya farmers often planted them under the protective canopy of taller mother trees, perhaps ceiba, rubber, or fruit trees, which provided that essential dappled light, a sort of natural sunscreen for the delicate youngsters. This agroforestry system was incredibly sophisticated, creating a diverse and resilient environment that mimicked the natural rainforest, rather than clearing vast tracts for monoculture. A lesson modern agriculture is slowly, and rather painfully, relearning. These groves weren't just cacao farms, they were ecosystems, buzzing with pollinators like tiny midges, without which, by the way, you wouldn't get any cacao pods at all. Forget bees for a moment, these almost invisible flies were the true heroes of cacao pollination. It's a bit of a fringe tidbit, the critical role of these minuscule insects, often overlooked in the grand narrative of agriculture, yet absolutely vital. If they ever went on strike, the ancient Maya elite would have had a serious beverage crisis. You approach a tree, its trunk and branches laden with pods in various stages of ripeness. The colours are a spectrum. The deep green of youth, gradually blushing to yellow, orange, or even a rich, dusky purple as they mature. Knowing exactly when to harvest was crucial. Too early, and the beans inside wouldn't be fully developed, lacking the fat content and flavour precursors essential for good chocolate. Too late, and the pod might start to rot or be claimed by opportunistic wildlife. Monkeys and squirrels being notorious cacao thieves, possessing a remarkably good palate for perfectly ripe fruit. You'd probably be eyeing that one particularly cheeky squirrel, with a mixture of annoyance and begrudging respect for its discernment. The harvesting itself was a careful, almost surgical operation. The pods, as we've seen, grow directly from the trunk and main branches, often nestled in awkward spots. You can't just yank them off like apples. Doing so could damage the delicate flower cushions on the bark from which future pods would emerge. This would be like killing the golden goose, or at least seriously annoying it. So, harvesters used specialized tools, perhaps a long pole with a sharp, curved blade attached to its end for reaching higher pods, or a smaller, keen knife for those within easy grasp. You make a clean cut at the peduncle, the thick stem connecting the pod to the tree, ensuring the productive tissue remains intact. Each pod is handled with a reverence, befitting its status. There's a quiet focus in this work, a rhythm passed down through generations. It's not about speed, but precision and respect for the tree that provides. Once harvested, the pods, heavy and fragrant, would be gathered into baskets, perhaps woven from local reeds or palm fronds. These baskets would then be carefully carried back to the village or processing area. This journey itself could be arduous, through winding forest paths, perhaps across streams or uneven terrain. The weight of the precious cargo, a constant reminder of its value. The mainstream historical fact here is that cacao was, for the Maya, not just a foodstuff, but a significant prestige good, often controlled by the elite and used in important ceremonies. Its careful cultivation and harvesting underscored its importance. This wasn't just casual farming. As you walk back with your share of the harvest, the weight on your shoulders is more than just physical. It's the weight of tradition, of sustenance, of spiritual significance. The success of this harvest would influence not just the availability of a beloved drink, but also potentially the wealth and influence of your community, given cacao's later role as currency. Historians still argue whether the extensive cultivation of cacao was primarily driven by elite demand for sumptuary goods, or if more common folk had regular access to simpler forms of cacao-based drinks for everyday sustenance. The truth, as often is the case, likely lies somewhere in between, with different qualities and preparations available to different strata of society. But the care taken, right from this initial stage of selecting and picking the pods, speaks volumes. Each pod represents potential flavour, potential wealth, potential connection to the divine. And you, as the harvester, are the very first guardian of that potential, your hands bringing the god's food from the sacred shade of the grove towards the warmth of the human hearth. The air in these groves is thick with the scent of damp earth and possibility, a stark contrast to the often drier, sunnier clearings where the next stage of transformation will take place. The jungle hums its ancient song around you, a gentle prelude to the magic yet to come. The journey of the cacao bean from the protective embrace of the pod to something even remotely resembling chocolate is a transformative process, and the next stage, fermentation and drying, is utterly crucial. You've returned from the shaded grove, your basket's heavy with those beautiful, enigmatic pods. Now, the real alchemy begins, under the careful watch of the sun, or at least the ambient warmth of the Mesoamerican climate. You're no longer in the cool, damp realm of the deep forest, but likely in a more open area, perhaps a specially prepared clearing near the village, where the elements can play their part. First, the pods must be opened. This isn't as simple as cracking a nut. The husk of a cacao pod is thick, tough, and leathery. You'd likely use a sturdy, sharp tool. perhaps a heavy stone or a wooden mallet and a sharp blade, to carefully crack open the pods without damaging the precious beans nestled within. Imagine the satisfying thwack as the husk yields, revealing the sight and scent within. It's a moment of revelation. A cluster of about 30 to 50 beans, each about the size of a large almond, embedded in that sweet, white, almost cottony pulp. The aroma released at this point isn't of chocolate, not yet. It's fruity, a little acidic, a complex bouquet that hints at the richness to come. Remember how we thought the pulp was probably the first attraction to cacao? Well, this pulp plays a starring, if somewhat sacrificial, role in fermentation. Once freed from their protective casing, the beans, still swaddled in their sugary pulp, are piled together. This might be done in specially constructed wooden boxes, or simply in heaps on large leaves, like banana or plantain leaves, often covered with more leaves to retain heat and moisture. This is where the magic of fermentation takes over, a process entirely reliant on naturally occurring yeasts and bacteria present on the surface of the pods and in the surrounding environment. It's a wild fermentation, an art perfected through observation and experience rather than with lab-cultured starter yeasts you might find in a modern bakery. For about 5 to 7 days, depending on the ambient temperature and the specific local tradition, these heaps of beans and pulp undergo a remarkable transformation. During the first couple of days, yeasts go to work on the sugars in the pulp, converting them into alcohol, a process familiar to anyone who's ever made wine or beer. You might even notice a slightly boozy aroma rising from the fermenting mass. It's probably not enough to get anyone tipsy, more's the pity, but it's a vital first step. As the temperature within the heap rises, fueled by this microbial activity, bacteria like acetobacter take over, converting the alcohol into acetic acid. This is the same acid that gives vinegar its tang. This acidic environment, combined with the heat generated, which can reach up to 50 degrees Celsius or 122 Fahrenheit, quite a fever for a bean, is what truly begins to change the chemistry within the cacao bean itself. The mainstream historical fact is that this fermentation process is absolutely critical for developing the flavour precursors of chocolate. Without it, the beans would remain intensely bitter and somewhat flat, lacking the complex notes we associate with good cacao. Inside the bean, the previously dormant enzymes awaken. These enzymes start to break down complex molecules, including proteins and carbohydrates, into simpler compounds. Crucially, they also begin to reduce the astringency and bitterness. The purplish colour of a fresh cacao bean starts to turn into a richer brown. It's a bit like a very slow, very gentle cooking process, driven entirely by nature's microscopic helpers. This whole scene might not look particularly appealing. A wet, somewhat slimy mass of beans, often attracting fruit flies, who, let's face it, have a knack for finding anything remotely sweet and fermenting. You'd probably need a strong stomach and a lot of faith in the process. It's a quirky tidbit that early European observers of this process were often quite repulsed by it, little realizing that this rather unappetizing stage was the secret to the rich flavors they would later come to covet. One man's muck is another man's future bonbon, as they say. After the fermentation period is deemed complete, a judgment made by experienced hands based on smell, appearance, and perhaps even the sound the beans make when disturbed, the next critical step is drying. The beans, now separated from most of the decomposed pulp, are spread out in a thin layer, typically on woven mats or sometimes on raised wooden platforms, to allow for good air circulation. And then they bask in the sun. This drying process can take another week or two, again depending on the weather. The beans need to be turned regularly, much like you'd turn hay, to ensure even drying and prevent mould from taking hold. Too much moisture and you'd get rot. Too rapid drying in harsh direct sun and the beans might become brittle or develop off flavours. It's a delicate balance. The goal is to reduce the moisture content of the beans from around 60% down to about 6-7%. As they dry, they shrink slightly, and their colour deepens to that characteristic, rich, chocolatey brown. You can imagine the gentle rustling sound as the beans are turned, the warm sun on your back, the increasingly nutty and complex aroma beginning to emerge, a subtle promise of the drink to come. Historians still argue whether the specific techniques of fermentation and drying varied significantly enough across different Maya regions to produce distinct regional flavour profiles, akin to how terroir influences wine. While detailed records are scarce, it's highly probable that local environmental conditions and subtle variations in traditional practices did impart unique characteristics to the finished cacao. This meticulous, sun-kissed transformation is where the raw potential of the cacao fruit truly begins to concentrate, turning a wild jungle bounty into a refined ingredient, ready for the next steps of its journey toward becoming the sacred cacao. The patient waiting, the reliance on the sun and invisible microbes, it all speaks to a profound connection with natural processes, a partnership with the elements. The beans, now beautifully dried, shrunken, and a rich, earthy brown, carry within them the concentrated essence of their journey, from the shaded grove through the transformative fires of fermentation to their sun-drenched slumber. But their metamorphosis is not yet complete. The next stage, roasting, is where the true magic of chocolate aroma and flavour is coaxed out, a delicate art performed over the gentle heat of a hearth. You've moved indoors now, or perhaps to a covered kitchen area, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the increasingly complex fragrance of the cacao. The air is drier here, warmer, focused around the heart of the home or the community processing space, the fire. Imagine a shallow, wide clay comal, a type of flat griddle traditionally used throughout Mesoamerica for cooking tortillas, now repurposed for this crucial task. It's set over a carefully controlled fire, not too hot, not too cool. The dried cacao beans, perhaps a few handfuls at a time, are spread onto the warm surface of the comal. This isn't a set it and forget it operation. Constant attention is required. You'd be there, perhaps with a small wooden paddle, or even just your hands, carefully. See, gently stirring and turning the beans to ensure they roast evenly on all sides. Too little heat, and the flavours won't develop fully. Too much, and the beans will scorch, their precious potential turning to bitter ash. It's a bit like trying to toast marshmallows perfectly. A moment's inattention, and you've got a blackened disaster, only in this case the stakes are divinely higher. As the beans warm, a symphony of chemical reactions begins within them, most notably the Maillard reaction, that wonderful browning process, responsible for the delicious flavours in everything from seared steak to toasted bread to, yes, chocolate. The amino acids and sugars, transformed during fermentation, now interact under heat to create hundreds of new aromatic compounds. The scent filling the air starts to shift dramatically. The slightly acidic, fruity notes of the fermented bean begin to recede, replaced by deeper, nuttier, and recognisably chocolatey aromas. It's an intoxicating perfume, one that would have signalled to anyone nearby that something special was underway. You can almost hear the subtle crackling sound as the beans roast, their outer shells becoming brittle, a sign that they are nearing perfection. The roasting process serves several key purposes. Firstly, as mentioned, it develops those crucial flavour and aroma compounds. Secondly, it helps to further reduce the moisture content of the beans, making them more shelf stable. Thirdly, and very practically, it loosens the thin, papery shell or husk that encases the cacao nib, making it much easier to remove in the next step. This mainstream historical fact, the necessity of roasting for flavour development and husk removal, is a cornerstone of chocolate making, then and now. Modern chocolate production uses highly controlled industrial roasters, but the fundamental chemistry at play is exactly the same as what was happening on that simple clay comel thousands of years ago. The duration of the roast would depend on various factors: the type of bean, its moisture content, the intensity of the heat, and the desired flavour profile. Maya artisans would have relied on their senses, the colour of the beans, the aroma, the sound they made, to judge when the roast was complete. This was an experiential art, passed down through observation and practice. There were no fancy thermometers or timers. It was all about a deep, intuitive connection with the ingredient. A quirky tidbit is that some ethnographic accounts suggest that different Maya communities, or even individual families, might have had their own preferences for the degree of roast. Some perhaps preferring a lighter roast that preserved more of the fruity notes, others a darker, more intense roast. These subtle variations would have contributed to the diversity of chocolate experiences across the Maya world. You can imagine a friendly, or perhaps not so friendly, rivalry between neighbouring villages. Oh, their cacao is always a bit under-roasted, isn't it? A bit of ancient foodie snobbery, perhaps. Once the beans are deemed perfectly roasted, their colour a deep, lustrous brown, their aroma rich and inviting, their shells brittle to the touch, they are carefully removed from the comel and set aside to cool. Handling them at this stage requires care. They are hot and somewhat delicate. As they cool, the delightful aromas continue to evolve, settling into a complex harmony. Historians still argue whether the Maya added any other substances during the roasting process itself. Perhaps certain aromatic woods used for the fire to impart a smoky note, or even spices thrown onto the comel alongside the beans. While direct archaeological evidence for this is limited, it's not outside the realm of possibility, given their sophisticated use of flavours in the final beverage. The creativity of ancient cooks should never be underestimated. The cooled beans are now poised for their next transformation. They look and smell far more like what we might recognise as a precursor to chocolate. The simple hearth, the humble comel, the attentive human hand, these have combined to unlock a depth of flavour that was merely latent before. The smoke from the fire might still be curling gently upwards, carrying with it the lingering scent of toasted cacao, a comforting and sacred aroma that would have been deeply familiar to any Maya household or ceremonial centre. Each perfectly roasted bean is a tiny vessel of concentrated flavour, a testament to the patient application of heat and human ingenuity. The air around you is no longer just warm, it's fragrant, rich with the promise of the potent drink that lies just a few more steps away. With the cacao beans perfectly roasted and cooled, their brittle shells whispering of the treasure within, you are now ready for one of the most physically demanding and rhythmically satisfying stages of the ancient chocolate-making process: grinding. This is where the solid beans are transformed into a paste, the very essence of chocolate liquor, though in a much more rustic form than what a modern factory might produce. You'd move to a sturdy, well-worn metate, a slightly concave grinding stone, usually made from volcanic basalt or other hard stone, propped at a slight angle. Your tool? A mano, a smaller cylindrical stone held in both hands, perfectly shaped to fit the curve of the metate. This isn't a delicate task for the faint of arm. First, though, comes winnowing. The roasted beans need to be shelled, their thin, papery husks removed to reveal the precious cacao nibs inside. After roasting, these shells are quite loose and brittle. You might lightly crush the cooled beans, perhaps in a wooden mortar, or even just by hand, to break them up. Then, the mixture of broken nibs and shell fragments would be winnowed. This could be done by tossing the mixture into the air from a shallow basket or tray, allowing a gentle breeze, or perhaps just enthusiastic human puffing, to carry away the lighter shell pieces, while the heavier nibs fall back into the basket. It's a simple but effective technique, common for processing various grains and seeds across many ancient cultures. you'd see the light, papery husks dancing away on the air, leaving behind a pile of pure, concentrated cacao nibs. These nibs are the heart of the matter, intensely aromatic and already hinting at the richness they are about to release. They're probably quite tempting to snack on at this point, a crunchy, intensely flavoured, if still somewhat bitter, treat. Now, to the metate. You kneel or sit before it, the pile of cleaned nibs within easy reach. You take a handful of nibs and place them on the upper part of the metate. Then, with the mano gripped firmly, you begin the rhythmic push and pull, a back and forth motion that crushes and grinds the nibs between the two stone surfaces. It's a slow, repetitive, almost meditative process, but one that requires considerable effort and skill. The pressure you exert, the angle of the mano, the sweep of your arms, all contribute to the efficiency and quality of the grind. You can hear the gritty sound of stone on stone, punctuated by the crunching of the nibs as they yield their treasures. As you grind, the friction generates a gentle warmth. This warmth, combined with the intense pressure, begins to release the cocoa butter, the natural fat within the nibs. This is the mainstream historical fact about this stage. The grinding process transforms the dry, crumbly nibs into a thick, flowing paste known as cacao liquor or cacao mass. It's not alcoholic, despite the name liquor. Rather, it refers to the liquid state of the ground cacao. At first, the ground nibs might seem like a coarse, slightly oily powder, but as you continue to work, adding more nibs, grinding and regrinding, the cocoa butter melts and binds everything together. The texture changes, becoming smoother, more unctuous. The aroma intensifies yet again, now a deep, rich, almost primal chocolate scent filling the air around your workspace. It's quite hypnotic. The steady rhythm of your movement, the feel of the smooth stone, the transformation happening literally under your hands. This was undoubtedly women's work in Maya society, as the metate was a ubiquitous tool in the Mesoamerican kitchen, used for grinding maize, spices, and of course, cacao. Young girls would have learned this skill from their mothers and grandmothers, the rhythmic sound of the metate, a constant backdrop to daily life. It was physically demanding. Imagine doing this for hours, day after day. Modern sensibilities might call it a drudgery, but for the Maya woman, it was a fundamental act of transformation, turning raw ingredients into sustenance and sacred offering. There's a quiet power in that. A quirky tidbit related to this stage is the sheer variety of metates found in the archaeological record. Some are plain and utilitarian, clearly for everyday use. Others are intricately carved, sometimes with animal or geometric motifs, suggesting they might have been used for ceremonial grinding or by individuals of higher status. Some even have little channels carved into them, perhaps to help direct the flow of the precious cacao paste as it formed. These designer metarts offer a little window into the aesthetic considerations, even in a task as seemingly mundane as grinding. Perhaps a beautifully carved metate made the hours of labour just a little more enjoyable, or at least more prestigious. One can only hope. Historians still argue about the desired fineness of the grind for different types of cacao beverages. Was a coarser, more rustic paste acceptable for everyday drinks, while a smoother, more refined paste was reserved for elite consumption or ceremonial purposes? It's likely that the level of refinement varied. Achieving a truly silky smooth paste by hand on a stone metate would require immense time and effort, possibly multiple passes of grinding. You can imagine the texture was probably a bit more rustic than your average modern chocolate bar, perhaps with a little grit. Think stone ground mustard, but for chocolate. As the pile of fragrant warm cacao paste grows on the metate, or perhaps is scraped off into a nearby bowl, you'd feel a sense of accomplishment. This paste, still warm and pliable, is the foundational ingredient for the chocolate drinks of the Maya. It's potent, concentrated, and brimming with the complex flavours and psychoactive compounds that made cacao so revered. The journey from bean to paste has been one of patience, skill, and sheer physical exertion, transforming a hard, unassuming nib into a semi-liquid treasure. The gentle, persistent rasp of the mano on the metate is the heartbeat of this transformation, a sound that echoes down through centuries of Maya tradition. The rich, dark, and intensely aromatic cacao paste, still warm from the labour of the metate, is now ready for its next great adventure, the addition of spices and other flavourings. This is where Maya ingenuity and their deep understanding of the local pharmacopoeia truly shone, transforming the pure, somewhat bitter cacao base into a complex and often surprising beverage. You're not just making a drink, you're crafting an experience, layering flavours and aromas that would have tantalised the Maya palate and, occasionally, perhaps even singed a few unsuspecting taste buds. This wasn't about masking the cacao, it was about complementing and elevating its inherent qualities. The most famous, and perhaps most archetypal, addition to Maya chocolate was chili pepper. Yes, you heard that right. Spicy hot chocolate wasn't an edgy modern invention, it was an ancient classic. Various types of chilies, ranging in heat from mild and smoky to fiercely piquant, would have been available. These would likely be dried and then ground, perhaps on a smaller, dedicated metate or in a stone mortar, into a fine powder before being blended into the cacao paste or added to the liquid later. The specific type and amount of chili used would undoubtedly have varied based on regional preference. The occasion, and perhaps even the desired physiological effect, a little warmth for a cool evening, or a fiery kick to accompany a vigorous ritual dance. Imagine the tingle on your tongue, the slow burn that builds in the back of your throat, a stark contrast to the cool smoothness of the cacao itself. But chilies were just the beginning. The Maya had an entire spice rack of the rainforest at their disposal. One very common flavouring, and a mainstream historical fact of Maya chocolate, was the addition of achiote, also known as annatto. Derived from the seeds of the achiote tree, this vibrant natural colouring agent imparts a beautiful reddish-orange hue to the drink, as well as a subtle, earthy, slightly peppery flavour. Achiote was widely used in Mesoamerican cuisine, not just for colour, but also for its distinct taste profile, and it features prominently in depictions of cacao preparation in ancient Maya art. It made the drink visually appealing, adding to its ritual significance. Think of it as the ancient world's red dye number 5, only entirely natural and much tastier. Another intriguing and frequently mentioned flavouring is piper auritum, also known as hoja santa or sacred pepper leaf. This large, heart-shaped leaf has a complex aroma reminiscent of anise, licorice, sarsaparilla, and black pepper all rolled into one. It would have been ground or perhaps infused into the liquid to lend its unique aromatic signature. Allspice, derived from the dried, unripe berries of the pimenta dioica tree, native to Mesoamerica, was another likely candidate, offering warm, clove-like and peppery notes. Its Nahuatl name, Exoshikok, even hints at its fragrant, flowery qualities. The combination of these aromatic spices would have created a beverage that was a world away from the simple, sugary, hot cocoa of modern childhoods. This was grown-up stuff. Then there are the more floral and vanilla notes. Vanilla, believe it or not, is also native to Mesoamerica, derived from the pod of an orchid. While the complex curing process for vanilla beans as we know it today might not have been fully developed by the ancient Maya in the Classic period, they certainly used parts of the vanilla orchid, perhaps the flowers or green pods, to impart a delicate, sweet fragrance. Flowers themselves, such as Quararibia funebri, known as cacawaxo chittle or chocolate flower, were frequently added. These flowers have a distinctive aroma described as being like maple or fenugreek, adding a uniquely fragrant and slightly sweet dimension. This is a wonderfully quirky tidbit. Drinking your flowers, quite literally. You can just imagine someone complaining that their chocolate wasn't floral enough for their refined tastes. Honey was sometimes used as a sweetener, though it's important to remember that ancient Maya chocolate was often, if not predominantly, unsweetened or even deliberately bitter. But, for certain preparations, or for those with a slightly sweeter tooth, or perhaps a special occasion, honey collected from native stingless bees would have been a prized addition, lending its own complex floral notes along with its sweetness. Maize, in the form of finely ground cornmeal or masa, was also a very common additive. It served multiple purposes. It acted as a thickener, giving the drink more body and a gruel-like consistency, and it added a subtle, sweet, toasty flavour as well as caloric substance. This made the chocolate drink not just a beverage, but a more substantial, nourishing food. Historians still argue whether hallucinogenic or psychoactive substances, beyond the natural stimulants in cacao itself, like theobromine, were regularly added to chocolate drinks in all contexts, or if this was reserved for very specific shamanistic or ritualistic purposes. Some scholars point to archaeological evidence or iconographic interpretations, suggesting the inclusion of certain mushrooms or other powerful plant extracts, while others believe such additions were rare and highly specialized. It certainly adds another layer of intrigue to the food of the gods moniker, if some preparations were intended to help commune directly with said gods. So, as you stand there, the cacao paste before you, you begin to incorporate these carefully selected ingredients. Perhaps you're kneading in finely ground chili and achiote directly into the paste, or maybe you're preparing these flavourings to be added to the water with which the paste will be mixed. The combination of aromas is becoming truly extraordinary. The deep, rich chocolate base, the sharp sting of chili, the earthy notes of achiote, the exotic perfume of sacred pepper leaf or chocolate flower, maybe a hint of wild honey's sweetness. Each addition is deliberate, a carefully considered note in a complex aromatic chord. This blending process is an art form in itself, balancing flavours to create a beverage that is more than the sum of its parts. A potent, flavourful and deeply meaningful concoction, ready to be transformed into its final liquid form. Now that you've carefully blended your aromatic spices and other intriguing additions into the rich cacao paste, or perhaps set them aside to be incorporated into the liquid, we come to a fundamental characteristic of ancient Maya chocolate that often surprises the modern palate. It was predominantly unsweetened, and in many cases intentionally bitter. This starkly contrasts with the sugary concoctions that dominate the contemporary chocolate landscape. So, put away your sugar plums and prepare for a more robust, earthy, and often savoury experience. The cacao bean itself, in its raw or minimally processed state, is naturally quite bitter and astringent due to compounds like tannins and theobromine, while fermentation, roasting, and grinding mellow these characteristics somewhat. The inherent flavour profile of pure cacao is far from sweet. For the Maya, this bitterness wasn't necessarily a flaw to be overcome. It was an integral part of cacao's identity, a mark of its potency, and perhaps even its sacred power. Think of it like coffee or unsweetened tea. Acquired tastes for some, but deeply appreciated for their complexity and stimulating effects once your palate adjusts. You're not looking for a sugary rush here. You're seeking something more profound, more invigorating. The mainstream historical fact is that sugar, as we know it from sugarcane, was not available in the Americas until after European contact. Sugarcane is native to Southeast Asia and was brought to the New World by Columbus on his second voyage in 1493. So, the Maya simply didn't have access to large quantities of refined sugar to dump into their chocolate drinks, even if they had wanted to. Their primary sweeteners were honey from native stingless bees, Melipona species, which was a precious and relatively scarce resource, and various fruit pulps or saps, like that of the agave, which could provide a mild sweetness. While honey was sometimes added, as we've noted, it was likely used judiciously, perhaps for special occasion drinks or for medicinal preparations, rather than being a standard component of everyday cacao. The idea of chocolate as an overwhelmingly sweet confection is a relatively recent development in its long history. Imagine preparing the drink now. You take a portion of your carefully prepared cacao paste, perhaps already infused with spices, and mix it with water. This water might be hot or cold, depending on the desired preparation. As you stir, the paste slowly dissolves, creating a rich, dark liquid. If maize, corn, was part of your recipe, the finely ground meal would also be incorporated, lending body and a subtle earthy sweetness, but not an overt sugary taste. The focus remained on the complex interplay of the cacao itself with the added spices, the warmth of chili, the fragrance of flowers, the earthiness of achiote. These flavours were designed to dance with the inherent bitterness of the cacao, not to mask it. You might taste it, a thoughtful sip. It's intense, stimulating, the bitterness hitting the back of your tongue, followed by the warmth of the spices and then the lingering complex aftertaste of pure cacao. It's a grown-up flavour profile, demanding your attention. A quirky tidbit is the Maya association of bitterness with strength and vitality. In some Mesoamerican cultures, bitter substances were often seen as having powerful medicinal or spiritual properties. Consuming bitter cacao could have been seen as an act of invigorating the body and spirit, a way of partaking in the potent life force of the cacao god. It's a far cry from seeking out the sweetest item on the dessert menu. Perhaps their motto was, "If it's bitter, it must be good for you," or at least, "If it's bitter, it must be important." This cultural appreciation for bitterness is something that many modern Western palates have to consciously relearn. We've become so accustomed to sweetness that a truly bitter chocolate can be a shock, though a rather pleasant one once you acclimate. Historians still argue about the exact proportion of sweetened versus unsweetened cacao drinks in ancient Maya society. Some evidence, like the occasional depiction of honey pots alongside cacao imagery or residue analysis, suggesting traces of sugars, indicates that sweetened versions definitely existed. However, the bulk of linguistic evidence, the Maya word for cacao, often being associated with descriptors like bitter or spicy, and the frequent pairing with savoury or spicy ingredients, suggests that unsweetened or minimally sweetened preparations were the norm, especially for ritual and elite consumption. It's possible that more sweetened, honey-laden versions were enjoyed by children, or as a special treat, much like we might view dessert wines today. The everyday power-up chocolate, however, likely packed a bitter punch. So, as you contemplate this ancient beverage, swirling it in its clay cup, you're appreciating a different kind of sensory experience. The lack of overwhelming sweetness allows the other, more subtle flavours to come forward. The nutty notes from the roast, the fruity undertones from the fermentation, the complex aromatics of the added spices and flowers. It's a more contemplative drink, one that engages more of your taste receptors than just the sweet ones. It might make your lips tingle, your brow perspire slightly from the chili, and your mind sharpen from the theobromine. This was not a drink for mindlessly guzzling. It was a drink to be savoured, to be respected, a true elixir whose power was understood to lie not in its sugary appeal, but in its complex, stimulating, and often intriguingly bitter heart. The robust, authentic taste of the earth, the rainforest, and the sacred bean itself was the star, unadulterated by the easy allure of sweetness that would come to define it centuries later in far-off lands. With your cacao paste meticulously prepared, possibly spiced, and mixed with water to create the basic beverage, often unsweetened, as we've discussed, you're now at a stage that was incredibly important to the ancient Maya, achieving the perfect froth. A thick, rich, and persistent foam was highly prized, considered not just aesthetically pleasing, but also a sign of a well-made, high-quality cacao drink. This wasn't just a casual topping, it was an integral part of the presentation and enjoyment. You're aiming for a luxurious, velvety crown on your divine beverage. The desire for froth might seem a little fussy to us, accustomed perhaps to a quick stir of powder in milk, but for the Maya, it was serious business. The foam, often referred to in texts and depicted in art as yom cacao, cacao foam, or tsi cacao, fresh cacao, was the pinnacle of the chocolate drinking experience. How did they achieve this coveted texture without modern whisks, electric frothers, or steam wands? They relied on a rather dramatic and skillful technique, pouring. Imagine you have two cylindrical clay vessels, often quite tall and beautifully decorated. We'll get more into those later. One vessel contains your prepared cacao liquid. You would then lift this vessel high, sometimes as high as you could reach, and pour the liquid in a thin, steady stream into the second vessel held much lower, perhaps on the ground or a low table. This action, repeated back and forth multiple times from one vessel to the other, aerated the liquid, incorporating air and encouraging the formation of a thick, stable foam. It's a bit like a bartender theatrically pouring a cocktail, but with much more at stake than just looking cool, though it probably did look quite impressive. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Maya created foam by repeatedly pouring the chocolate drink from a height. It required skill, precision, and a good sense of balance to avoid spillage of the precious liquid. The height of the pour was crucial. The greater the distance the liquid travelled, the more air it would incorporate, and the more turbulence created upon impact, all contributing to a richer, denser foam. You can picture the scene. A Maya attendant, perhaps in a noble's court or a ceremonial setting, with arms outstretched, gracefully arcing the dark, fragrant liquid through the air. The sound would be a soft splashing, a gentle gurgle, as the cacao cascaded from one pot to another. It was a performance as much as a preparation method, a visual testament to the care and effort being invested in the drink. You'd have to have pretty good aim too, or you'd end up with a very sacred, very chocolatey puddle on the floor. One can only imagine the scolding an apprentice would get for a messy pour during an important ritual. Not only did you insult the gods, but you've also stained the ceremonial matting. A quirky tidbit relating to frothing is the potential use of specific ingredients to enhance foam stability. While the fats naturally present in cacao, the cocoa butter, do contribute to foam formation, some scholars suggest the Maya may have added other natural saponins, plant-derived compounds that act like soap and create stable bubbles, to their chocolate. Certain barks or roots, when agitated in water, produce a soapy lather. Could they have discovered that a pinch of this or a sliver of that helped create an even more impressive and lasting head of foam? While direct evidence is elusive, it's a fascinating possibility given their extensive botanical knowledge. Imagine a secret ingredient, known only to the best chocolate frothers, that guaranteed a perfect, cloud-like foam every time. It's the kind of ancient kitchen hack that would be priceless. Historians still argue whether different types of foam were desired for different occasions, or by different social classes. Was a lighter, airier foam preferred for some drinks, while a denser, creamier froth was the goal for others? Did the elites demand a more spectacular and persistent foam as a display of their status, while commoners, if they had access to foamed chocolate at all, contented themselves with a more modest, bubbly topping? The intricate details of Maya foam connoisseurship are largely lost to time, but the consistent depiction of heavily frothed chocolate in their art and hieroglyphic texts underscores its universal importance across various contexts. The glyph for cacao itself sometimes incorporates elements that seem to represent foam. The physical properties of the cacao liquid also played a role. A drink with more cocoa butter or perhaps thickened with a little maize, might have frothed more readily or held its foam longer than a thinner, more watery preparation. The temperature of the liquid could also influence foam formation, though most depictions suggest it was often served at ambient temperature or slightly warmed, rather than piping hot. You're essentially creating an emulsion, a suspension of air bubbles within the liquid, stabilized by the fats and proteins present. It's a delicate balance of chemistry and technique. As you complete your final pour, the top of the beverage in the lower vessel is now crowned with a thick, inviting layer of reddish-brown or deep brown foam. It's soft, almost cloud-like, a stark textural contrast to the liquid beneath. This foam wasn't just for show, it also affected the mouthfeel and aroma of the drink. The first sip would be through this light, airy layer, carrying the concentrated aromatics directly to your nose before the richer liquid even touched your tongue. It was a multi-sensory introduction to the pleasures of cacao, a testament to the skill and artistry of the preparer. The gentle quest for that perfect, pillowy foam, achieved through nothing more than gravity, patience, and practiced hands, elevated a simple mixture into a truly divine elixir. Now that your Maya chocolate drink is perfectly frothed, a luxurious crown of airy bubbles adorning its rich, dark surface, it deserves a vessel worthy of its divine status. The ancient Maya didn't just pour their precious cacao into any old mug. They developed specialized, often exquisitely decorated, pottery vessels designed specifically for the consumption of chocolate. These weren't just containers, they were works of art, status symbols, and crucial components of ritual and social life. You're about to appreciate the ancient world's equivalent of fine china, only much, much cooler, because, well, chocolate. The most characteristic type of vessel associated with Maya chocolate drinking is a tall, cylindrical vase, often with a slightly flared rim. These vessels, frequently found in elite burials and depicted in palace scenes on painted pottery and murals, seem perfectly designed for the frothing process we just discussed, their height facilitating the dramatic pouring from one to another. Holding one of these in your hands, you'd feel the smooth, cool clay, perhaps still faintly echoing the warmth of its last sacred contents. These weren't chunky, utilitarian pots. Many were surprisingly delicate, their thin walls testament to the skill of Maya potters. Imagine the care with which they were handled, especially during that high wire pouring act. Dropping one would be a costly mistake, both materially and, potentially, socially. What truly sets these cacao vessels apart is their often elaborate decoration. Maya artists used these cylindrical surfaces as canvases to depict a wide array of scenes and hieroglyphic texts. The mainstream historical fact is that many of these vessels explicitly state their purpose, and sometimes even name their owner or patron. You might find a band of hieroglyphs running around the rim, a sort of ancient label declaring something like, her cylindrical vessel for frothed cacao, followed by the name or titles of a lord or lady. It's like having your personal, custom-inscribed Starbucks cup, only infinitely more significant and artistically rendered. This primary standard sequence, as epigraphers call it, is a common feature on high-quality Maya ceramics, and it provides invaluable insights into their use and ownership. The imagery painted on these vessels is incredibly rich and varied. You might see scenes of gods interacting with cacao, mythological narratives involving the maize god and the discovery of cacao, or depictions of palace life where elites are shown drinking chocolate, often from vessels identical to the one you're holding. There could be elaborate portraits of rulers, courtly attendants engaged in ritual activities, or even scenes of warfare and captive taking, perhaps a little light, PTSD. With your morning pick-me-up? The colours, derived from mineral and vegetal pigments, could be vibrant, rich reds and oranges from iron oxides, blacks from manganese or carbon, creams and whites from clays, and the coveted Maya blue, a remarkably resilient pigment whose exact recipe still sparks some debate among scientists. Imagine sipping your spicy, frothy chocolate while contemplating a scene of the hero twins outwitting the lords of Xibalba, the underworld, painted right there on your cup. It's a multimedia experience. Ancient style. A quirky tidbit is the occasional discovery of vessels with a kill hole, deliberately poked through their base. These are often found in funerary contexts. The act of ritually killing the vessel was thought to release its spirit or essence, allowing it to accompany its owner into the afterlife. It suggests that these chocolate pots weren't just possessions. They were imbued with a certain life force or significance that extended beyond the mundane. It also ensured no one else could reuse the deceased's personal chocolate mug, which, depending on how you feel about sharing, might be considered either profoundly spiritual or just a tad possessive. This is my cacao cup, and I'm taking it with me. Beyond the tall cylindrical vases, other forms were also used for cacao. Smaller bowls, sometimes with spouts or handles, and even tripod plates have been found with cacao residues. It's possible that different types of cacao preparations, perhaps thicker, gruel-like versions, or those intended for offerings rather than direct consumption, were served in different types of vessels. Historians still argue whether the specific iconography on a cacao vessel correlated directly with the type of cacao drink served in it, or the specific ritual context of its use. For example, did a vessel adorned with images of a specific deity mean it was used for drinks offered to that god, or during festivals in their honour? While logical, direct proof is often elusive, but the sheer specificity of the texts and imagery strongly suggests a deeply meaningful connection. The craftsmanship involved in creating these vessels was immense. Maya potters, likely women in many communities, worked without the potter's wheel, building their creations through coiling, moulding, and hand-shaping techniques. The precision of the cylindrical forms, the thinness of the walls, and the smoothness of the surfaces are remarkable. After forming, the vessels would be burnished to a high sheen, then painted with intricate designs using fine brushes made from animal hair or plant fibres. Finally, they were fired in open pits or simple kilns, a delicate process where temperature control was crucial to achieving the desired hardness and colour. Each vessel was a unique creation, a testament to the potter's skill and artistic vision. Holding such a vessel, you are not just holding a cup. You are holding a piece of history, a carrier of stories, a status symbol, and an essential tool for ritual communion. The designs would have been familiar, part of the visual vocabulary of Maya culture, reinforcing beliefs, lineage, and social order with every sip. The coolness of the clay against your hand, the weight of it, the visual feast of its decoration, all contributed to the sensory experience of drinking cacao, making it a far more profound act than simply quenching thirst or getting a caffeine fix. It was an immersion in culture, art, and the sacred. We've explored the elaborate preparation, the dramatic frothing, and this divine elixir. Was cacao a democratic drink, available to all members of Maya society, or was it an exclusive privilege, beautiful vessels associated with ancient Maya chocolate? But a crucial question lingers. Who actually got to enjoy this divine, labour, intensive beverage? A foamy symbol of power and status reserved for the crème de la crème, or perhaps the froth de la froth. Was cacao a democratic drink, available to all, or was it primarily an elixir for the elites, a symbol? The answer, like many things in history, is nuanced, but the evidence strongly suggests that while cacao in some form might have power and privilege, the answer, like many things in history, is nuanced. But the prevailing evidence points towards cacao have been accessible more broadly. The high-quality, elaborately prepared, and richly significant chocolate drinks were predominantly the domain of the being a significant prestige good, with its consumption heavily weighted towards the upper echelons of Maya society. Imagine yourself elite. The most compelling evidence for elite control comes from the very contexts in which cacao-related artifacts are found. Now, not as the humble harvester or the diligent grinder, but as an observer in a bustling Maya city-state, perhaps tea. Those stunning cylindrical vases we just admired, often inscribed with names of rulers and nobles, they are overwhelmingly discovered in the tombs official or palenque during their classic period splendor. You see pyramids piercing the jungle canopy, grand plazas teeming with activity, and palaces adorned with intricate carvings. It's within these centers of power, the courts of kings adore the wealthy and powerful, within palace complexes and in ceremonial centers. Their intricate iconography depicts kings, queens, priests, and other high, the residences of nobles, and the precincts of powerful priests. That chocolate consumption appears to have been most concentrated and elaborate. The status individuals partaking in cacao consumption during important events, audiences, or rituals. The mainstream historical fact is that cacao was a mainstream historical fact, is that numerous depictions in Maya art, from painted pottery to stone lintels and stucco reliefs, show rulers' prestige good, a luxury item, whose consumption was a marker of social standing in ancient Maya society, much like champagne or caviar, and high-status individuals partaking in cacao ceremonies receiving cacao as tribute, or overseeing its preparation. Those beautifully inscribed cylindrical vases, we might be in other cultures. If you were pictured on a pot drinking chocolate, you were probably a big deal. Consider disgust. They are overwhelmingly found in elite burials and palatial contexts, reinforcing the link between cacao and high social standing. The resources involved. Cultivating cacao was labor-intensive. The careful harvesting, the lengthy fermentation and drying, the arduous sheer amount of labor and resources required to produce high-quality cacao drinks also suggests it wasn't an everyday tipple for the roasting and grinding. All these processes required time, specialized knowledge, and often dedicated land that could otherwise be used for staple common farmer. Cultivating cacao groves, harvesting and processing the beans, acquiring the often exotic spices, and crafting the specialized crops like maize. While a common farmer might have had a few cacao trees in their household garden for personal or local use, the large pottery, all of this represented a significant investment. It makes sense that those who controlled land, labor, and trade routes would have had scale production necessary to supply the elaborate feasts and ceremonies of the elite, likely relied on controlled plantations and tribute systems. The elite could preferential access to the finest preparations. For a ruler, offering a frothed, spiced cacao beverage to visiting dignitaries, or during command, the labour and resources to produce and procure cacao in significant quantities. While the average commoner would have had far more limited access, important rituals was a potent display of wealth, power, and sophisticated taste. It was the ancient equivalent of serving vintage champagne, or, it's the age-old story, those with power get the good stuff. They probably didn't have a single malt scotch. You wouldn't just waste the good stuff on any old Tuesday, unless you were, fair trade certified label back then, but you can bet the powerful lords weren't paying top bean for their no, the king. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that commoners never tasted cacao in any form, its supply. Furthermore, the ingredients often added to the most esteemed cacao drinks, the rare spices, the fragrant flowers. Perhaps it is quite plausible that simpler, less refined cacao preparations might have been accessible to a broader segment of the population. At honey were themselves valuable commodities. Access to these too would have been easier for those with wealth and extensive trade connections, least occasionally. Perhaps they consumed cacao mixed with maize gruel, a toil, as a more sustaining, if less glamorous, The ability to prepare chocolate with a complex array of expensive flavourings and serve it in finely crafted vessels was a conspicuous display of affluence and influence. It was a way of saying, look at me, I can afford not just the food. Maybe leftover or lower quality beans found their way into more rustic beverages. A quirky tidbit here is the existence of terms in Maya languages that seem to differentiate between types or qualities of cacao drinks. For example, there might have been a beans, but all the fancy extras, and the pot to put it in. A bit like owning a supercar today, but distinction between chiquil cacao, frothy, high quality cacao for the elite, and simpler, tastier, and less likely to get a parking ticket. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that commoners and perhaps more diluted or less spiced versions available to others. Think of it as the difference between a perfectly crafted artisanal latte from never tasted cacao. It's plausible that simpler, less elaborately prepared cacao beverages, perhaps made with lower grade beans or extended with more maize and fewer expensive spices, were consumed by a wider segment of the population. At least on occasion, a high-end cafe versus a cup of instant coffee. Both might contain caffeine, but the experience and social cachet are worlds apart. Historians still argue vigorously about the extent of cacao consumption among non-elites. Some argue that cacao was almost. A quirky tidbit that supports this idea comes from some ethno-historical accounts from the post-conquest period, exclusively a luxury good, tightly controlled by the ruling class. Its trickle-down effect minimal. Others propose which mention more humble cacao-based gruels or porridges being part of the diet of ordinary people. These might not a more tiered system, where commoners might have cultivated a few cacao trees for their own use or for local trade, enjoying have been the frothed, spicy elixirs of the kings, but rather a more nourishing, if less glamorous, way to benefit from the cacao bean's energy and nutrients. Think of it as the difference between a Michelin-starred hot, simpler preparations, while the really fancy, elaborately spiced and frothed versions were reserved for the top brass. Archaeological evidence: chocolate and a simple mug of instant cocoa, both chocolate but worlds apart in quality and cultural cachet. Histor of cacao residues in more humble domestic pottery is scarcer than in elite vessels, but it's not entirely absent. Ian still argue about the extent of cacao consumption among the Maya general populace. Was it a rare treat, perhaps enjoyed only during lending some support to the idea of broader, if less ostentatious consumption? It's also possible that access specific festivals or market days when they might trade for a small amount. Or was it a more regular, if modest, part of their varied geographically and temporally? In regions where cacao grew more abundantly, it might have been less exclusive than in areas where it had diet in certain cacao-growing regions. Archaeological chemistry is starting to shed some light on this, as residue analysis on more to be imported. The use of cacao beans as currency, which we'll explore more later, also complicates the common, undecorated pottery from non-elite households, sometimes reveals traces of theobromine, the key chemical marker picture. If beans were money, then even commoners would have handled them, though perhaps not in quantities large enough to brew for cacao. This suggests that access wasn't exclusively limited to the top tier, even if the fancy up a feast-worthy batch of chocolate regularly. Perhaps they saved up their cacao change for a special occasion, or preparations were. Perhaps it was like wine in ancient Rome. The emperor drank the finest Falernian, while the plebs used it to trade for other essential goods. It's like having a pocket full of coffee beans today. You had a cheaper, rougher vintage, but both were still technically drinking wine. The very act of drinking frothed chocolate could roast and grind them yourself, but most people just use them to buy a prepared cup. So, while this seems to have been imbued with a certain formality and status, in Maya art, it's rarely depicted as a casual, most luxurious, ceremonially significant, and artfully presented chocolate drinks, were almost certainly the preserve of kings, queens, nobles' everyday activity for everyone. Instead, it's associated with diplomacy, sharing cacao to seal treaties, important life events, priests, and perhaps successful warriors or merchants. It's probably an oversimplification to say that no one else everages, accessions to power, religious ceremonies, and elite feasting. The vessels themselves, being valuable and fragile, were not got a taste. The Maya world was complex and diverse. It's more likely that cacao, in its many potential forms, existed on a spectrum of availability and refinement. The common farmer, toiling in his maize field, might not have been practical for hard daily labour in the fields. So, even if a farmer grew cacao beans, they might be more likely to trade sipping frothed, chili-spiced cacao from a beautifully painted cylinder vase every morning, but he might have encountered it in a more modest form, or aspired to it, or at least understood its immense cultural and symbolic them for other necessities, or pay them as tribute, rather than regularly consuming them in the elite style. Ultimately, while the humble cacao bean began its journey in the wild, accessible to anyone who stumbled upon it, its transformation into the revered value from a distance. The fragrant aroma, wafting from a noble's kitchen or a temple precinct, would have been a cacao of the Maya, involved a significant investment of labour and resources, naturally leading to its elevation as a symbol of power and prestige. The finest chocolate drinks, meticulously prepared and artistically presented, were a beverage fit for gods and kings, a constant reminder of its desirability and its association with power and the sacred, making those sips, enjoyed by the elite, all the more potent and meaningful. For them, it wasn't just a drink, it was an affirmation of their place in the cosmos, luxurious indulgence that reinforced the social hierarchy with every frothy, aromatic sip. For the privileged few, it was a taste. The meticulously prepared, and often exclusive cacao beverage wasn't just a delightful indulgence for the Maya elite. It played a profound and central role in their most sacred rituals and solemn ceremonies. This wasn't simply about enjoying a tasty drink in a fancy setting. It was about connecting with the divine, marking life's most important transitions and sustaining the cosmic order. You are no longer just an observer of daily life, but a witness to the deeper spiritual currents that animated Maya civilization, where chocolate flowed as a sacred libation. Imagine yourself in the heart of a Maya ceremonial precinct. Towering stone pyramids, painted in vibrant reds and blues, rise towards the heavens. The air is thick with the scent of burning copal incense, its sweet, resinous smoke mingling with the rich aroma of cacao being prepared nearby. Drums beat a rhythmic pulse, and flutes trill ethereal melodies. Here, in these hallowed spaces, cacao was far more than a beverage. It was an essential offering to the gods, a medium for spiritual communion, and a vital ingredient in the liturgical life of the community. The mainstream historical fact is that cacao was frequently used as a libation, poured out onto altars, into sacred fires, or onto the earth as an offering to appease deities and ensure their continued favour. This act of pouring, a sacrifice of precious substance, was believed to nourish the gods and maintain the delicate balance between the human and supernatural realms. One of the most significant ritual uses of cacao was in ceremonies related to agricultural fertility and the life-giving power of maize. Remember the maize god, Hunhunarpu, who was sometimes associated with the origin of cacao. In many myths, cacao and maize are intertwined, both seen as essential gifts from the divine realm, critical for human sustenance. Offering cacao to agricultural deities, or using it in rituals designed to ensure a good harvest, would have been a common practice. You might see priests, adorned in elaborate jaguar pelts and feathered headdresses, carefully pouring frothed chocolate onto an altar carved with the image of the maize god, the dark liquid seeping into the stone, a symbolic returning of the god's gift back to its divine source. These offerings weren't casual, they were performed with great solemnity and precision, following ancient protocols. Cacao also played a key role in life cycle rituals, births, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriages, and, crucially, funerals. When a noble was buried, vessels filled with cacao, or even cacao beans themselves, were often included among the grave goods. This was not just to provide refreshment for the deceased on their journey to the underworld, Zabalba, but also likely as a symbol of their status and their connection to the sacred, even in death. The Popol Vuh, the sacred Maya creation story, even mentions cacao being used in the underworld. There's a powerful continuity implied. The drink valued in life was also essential in the afterlife. You can imagine family members anointing the deceased with a cacao-based mixture, or pouring a final libation of chocolate into the tomb before it was sealed, a final act of love and reverence. Marriage ceremonies, especially among the elite, were often sealed with the ritual exchange and consumption of cacao. The bride and groom might share a cup of froth chocolate, symbolizing their union and the commingling of their families and fortunes. This practice, which persisted even into the early colonial period, highlights cacao's role in solidifying social bonds and alliances. It wasn't just a cheers with any old drink. It was a culturally resonant act, imbued with historical and spiritual significance. Forget a champagne toast. A shared gourd of spicy, bitter chocolate was the Maya way of saying, I do. Or at least, our families are now strategically aligned past the frothy stuff. A quirky tidbit is the use of cacao in divination rituals. Some ethno-historical sources suggest that Maya priests, or shamans, might have scryed for omens by examining the patterns formed by cacao beans thrown onto a special cloth, or perhaps by interpreting the swirls of foam on a freshly prepared chocolate drink. While not as widely documented as other divination methods, like crystal scrying or casting lots, the sacred nature of cacao makes its incorporation into such practices plausible. Imagine a priest, eyes closed in concentration, whispering an incantation over a bowl of freshly poured chocolate, seeking guidance from the gods in the delicate dance of its ephemeral foam. Does the froth lean left? Ah, a bountiful harvest is nigh. Historians still argue about the precise recipes and specific ritual protocols for cacao used in different ceremonies. Were there specially consecrated cacao groves whose beans were reserved only for ritual use? Were certain spice combinations, or pouring techniques, employed for offerings to specific deities? The details are often lost, preserved only fragmentarily in art and inscriptions. However, the sheer pervasiveness of cacao in ritual contexts, from large-scale state ceremonies in major cities to more intimate rituals at local shrines, is undeniable. Blood offerings, often involving self-sacrifice through bloodletting, were a common feature of Maya ritual, and sometimes cacao was mixed with blood or offered alongside it, further underscoring its profound sacred value. It was literally placed on par with the most precious offering of all, human life force. The very act of preparing and consuming chocolate in a ritual setting was likely highly formalized. Specific chants might have been recited, particular gestures used, and only certain individuals, like priests or initiated nobles, permitted to handle the sacred beverage or its implements. The frothing process itself, with its dramatic pouring, could have been a visual spectacle, part of the ritual theatre designed to impress both human participants and divine observers. The scent, the taste, the visual appeal of the frothed liquid in its ornate vessel, all contributed to creating a heightened sensory experience. Focusing the minds and spirits of the participants on the sacred proceedings, it was a multi-sensory engagement with the divine, mediated by this potent earthy elixir. The pouring of cacao was more than just discarding a liquid. It was feeding the gods, honouring ancestors, and sanctifying the moment. Beyond its roles as a divine elixir, and a key component of sacred rituals, cacao held another, surprisingly practical, and utterly fascinating function in ancient Maya society. It was used as currency. That's right, those precious little beans, so carefully cultivated, fermented, roasted, and ground to make their revered drink, also served as cold, hard, bean cash. You could literally take your chocolate money to the market and trade it for goods and services. This dual role, as both a consumable luxury and a medium of exchange, makes cacao almost unique in the ancient world. Imagine yourself now in a bustling Maya marketplace, perhaps in a large plaza shaded by awnings, filled with the chatter of vendors and the aromas of exotic fruits, cooked foods, and yes, the faint, earthy scent of cacao beans being counted out. Here, amongst the pottery, textiles, obsidian tools, and colourful bird feathers, cacao beans served as a standardised form of currency, facilitating trade both locally and over long distances. The mainstream historical fact is that cacao beans were widely accepted as money throughout Mesoamerica, not just by the Maya, but also by other cultures like the Aztecs, who continued and even expanded this practice. Chronicles from the time of Spanish contact frequently describe the use of cacao beans for all sorts of transactions, from buying a rabbit to paying a labourer's wage. The value of cacao beans as currency wasn't arbitrary. It was underpinned by several factors. Firstly, as we've seen, cacao was a highly desired luxury good, especially for the elite. This inherent desirability gave it intrinsic value. Secondly, its production was labour-intensive and geographically restricted to specific lowland regions, meaning its supply was naturally limited, preventing massive inflation, most of the time anyway. Thirdly, the beans themselves were relatively portable, durable when properly dried, and countable, making them suitable for use in transactions. You could carry a pouch of cacao coins much more easily than, say, a sack of maize of equivalent value. Think of it as having edible money, which, if times got really tough, you could presumably brew up. Not recommended for your leather wallet, however. Standardized units were often used when dealing with larger quantities of cacao beans. For example, a ziquipilli among the Aztecs, a system likely inherited or shared with the Maya, consisted of 8 0 beans. Different goods had established prices in cacao beans. A turkey might cost you 100 beans, a dugout canoe, perhaps several ziquipilli, depending on its size and quality. Even services could be paid for in cacao. A day's labour for a porter carrying goods might be worth a certain number of beans. It created a surprisingly sophisticated market economy, all based on this humble agricultural product. It's a bit like going to the farmer's market today and trying to pay for your organic kale with coffee beans. The vendor might look at you funny, but in the Maya world it was perfectly normal. A quirky tidbit relating to cacao as currency is the documented existence of counterfeit cacao beans. Unscrupulous individuals would sometimes carefully hollow out cacao beans, fill the empty shells with earth or avocado rind powder, and then reseal them to pass them off as genuine. This suggests that, just like any currency system, the Maya cacao economy had its share of fraudsters trying to, quite literally, make a worthless bean look valuable. There were probably ancient Maya versions of spotting a fake bean guides for merchants. If it crumbles too easily or tastes suspiciously of dirt, be wary. It adds a rather human, if slightly devious, touch to this ancient monetary system. One wonders if they had bean inspectors at the market gates. Historians still argue about the exact exchange rates and the extent to which the cacao currency system was formalized and regulated across different Maya city-states, or over time. Was there a central Maya reserve bank setting the bean standard? Probably not in such a formal sense. It's more likely that values fluctuated based on supply, demand, the quality of the beans, larger, plumper beans being worth more, and regional variations. A major drought affecting cacao-producing regions could cause beanflation, while a bumper crop might lead to a temporary devaluation. It was a living, breathing monetary system, subject to the same economic pressures we see today, just with a much more aromatic medium of exchange. The use of cacao as currency also had significant implications for long-distance trade. Cacao-producing regions, primarily in the lowlands, could trade their valuable beans for goods from other areas, such as highland obsidian, jade, quetzal feathers, or salt from coastal regions. This facilitated the movement of goods and ideas across Mesoamerica, with cacao beans acting as the lubricant for these complex trade networks. Armed merchants, sometimes depicted in Maya art, would undertake perilous journeys, their precious cargo of cacao beans and other goods, making them targets for bandits. Controlling the cacao trade routes was a source of considerable wealth and power for certain Maya polities. So, when a Maya individual handled cacao beans, they weren't just touching a potential beverage. They were holding actual purchasing power. A handful of beans could mean the difference between a full stomach and an empty one, or the acquisition of a necessary tool, or a beautiful piece of jewellery. This dual nature of cacao, as both a revered psychoactive substance and a practical unit of account, gave it a unique cultural potency. It connected the spiritual realm with the everyday realities of the marketplace, blurring the lines between the sacred and the profane. Each bean was a tiny node in a vast economic and cultural web, a fragrant reminder of the intricate connections that bound Maya society together. Beyond its crucial roles in ritual, social life, and the economy, the versatile cacao bean also found its place in the ancient Maya medicine cabinet. The Maya possessed a sophisticated understanding of herbal remedies, and cacao, with its complex chemical composition and noticeable physiological effects, was naturally incorporated into their pharmacopoeia. They weren't just drinking it for pleasure or status, they were also using it to treat a surprising variety of ailments. You're now peering into the world of Maya healers, where cacao was not just food of the gods, but also a potent medicine. The Maya medical system was deeply intertwined with their spiritual beliefs. Illness was often seen as a result of imbalance, divine displeasure, or the malevolent actions of spirits. Healing, therefore, involved not just physical remedies, but also rituals, prayers, and offerings. Cacao, with its inherent sacred status, fit perfectly into this holistic approach. Theobromine, the primary stimulant in cacao, chemically similar to caffeine, has diuretic, stimulant, and vasodilator properties, effects that would have been empirically observed by Maya healers over centuries. The mainstream historical fact is that cacao was used by the Maya for various medicinal purposes, often in combination with other plants, to treat a range of conditions from fatigue and digestive issues to fever and heart ailments. Imagine a Maya healer, a knowledgeable AJ men, or female IX men, carefully preparing a medicinal cacao concoction. They wouldn't just be throwing ingredients together, there would be a precise recipe, perhaps passed down orally through generations, or even recorded in hieroglyphic codices, though sadly, few of these medical texts survive. The preparation might involve specific parts of the cacao plant, not just the beans, but perhaps also the pulp, the shells, or even the flowers and leaves, each believed to have different properties. The cacao might be mixed with specific herbs known for their healing qualities, the bitterness of the cacao perhaps even helping to mask the unpleasant taste of other medicinal plants, a bit like that spoonful of sugar, except, in this case, it was a spoonful of bitter, sacred chocolate. For instance, cacao was often used as a vehicle to deliver other medicines. Its strong flavour could make less palatable ingredients more tolerable, and its stimulating effects could help to energize a patient or promote recovery. It was also believed to have properties that could soothe stomach ailments and improve digestion, especially when mixed with certain spices. You might see a patient with a fever being given a cacao drink mixed with chili, which can induce sweating, potentially helping to break a fever, or other febrifuge herbs. For fatigue or listlessness, a strong cup of cacao, rich in theobromine, would have been a natural pick-me-up, much like we reach for coffee or tea today. A particularly quirky tidbit involves the use of cocoa butter, the natural fat from cacao beans. While the Maya didn't separate cocoa butter on an industrial scale like we do today, they were certainly aware of this fatty component. Ethno-historical accounts suggest that cocoa butter was used topically as a salve or ointment to treat skin conditions, burns, rashes, or chapped lips. Its emollient properties would have been soothing and protective. Imagine a Maya mother gently applying a cocoa butter-rich cacao paste to her child's scraped knee, or a warrior using it to soothe skin chafed by armour or travel. It's a bit like discovering your favourite treat also doubles as a very effective all-natural skin cream. Who knew that slathering yourself in chocolate could be medicinal? Well, sort of. Cacao was also associated with matters of the heart, not just romantically, but physiologically. Some historical sources suggest it was used to treat heart palpitations, or what we might today call angina, possibly due to the vasodilating effects of theobromine, which can help to improve blood flow. Of course, their understanding of cardiovascular physiology was different from ours, but they observed the effects and applied them accordingly. It's fascinating to think of cacao as an ancient heart tonic, a testament to their keen observational skills. Historians still argue about the efficacy of some of these ancient cacao-based remedies and the exact illnesses they were purported to cure. Without detailed clinical trials from 500 AD, it's hard to say definitively which treatments worked, which had a placebo effect, and which were based more on magical thinking. However, modern science has confirmed that dark chocolate, which is closer to ancient cacao preparations than milk chocolate, does indeed contain antioxidants and other beneficial compounds. The Maya, through centuries of trial and error, clearly recognized some of cacao's genuinely therapeutic properties, even if their explanations for why it worked were couched in a different cosmological framework. The administration of medicinal cacao would likely have been accompanied by specific incantations or rituals, reinforcing the spiritual dimension of the healing process. The healer might chant over the mixture, invoking the aid of patron deities of medicine or cacao itself, before giving it to the patient. The very act of consuming a sacred substance like cacao, prepared by a respected healer, would have had a powerful psychological effect, contributing to the patient's recovery. It wasn't just about the chemicals. It was about belief, ritual, and the holistic well-being of the individual within their cultural context. So, as you witness this ancient healing practice, you realize that cacao's significance permeated nearly every facet of Maya life. It wasn't just for feasting, trading, or communing with gods during grand ceremonies. It was also a trusted ally in times of sickness and discomfort, a versatile ingredient in the Maya quest for health and balance. The humble bean, transformed by human hands and ingenuity, offered not just pleasure and spiritual connection, but also a measure of physical relief, its bitter taste a comforting reminder of its potent healing power. While we've been discussing ancient Maya chocolate preparation as if it were a monolithic practice, it's important to remember that the Maya world was not a single, unified empire, but a collection of distinct city-states, each with its own local traditions, resources, and perhaps even its own culinary quirks when it came to their beloved cacao. Just as Italian cuisine varies dramatically from Tuscany to Sicily, or Mexican food from Oaxaca to Yucatan, it's highly probable that chocolate preparations exhibited subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, differences across the various Maya kingdoms. You're now taking a nuanced journey, appreciating the regional flavours and specific preferences that might have characterised cacao consumption from one city-state to another. Imagine travelling from the misty highlands of Chiapas, where cities like Palenque flourished, down to the humid lowlands of the Petén Basin, home to giants like Tikal and Calakmul, and then further east to the Caribbean coast where sites like Tulum thrived. Each region had its unique ecological niche, access to different trade goods, and its own political and cultural history. These factors would have inevitably influenced how they prepared and consumed chocolate. The mainstream historical fact here is that while core elements of cacao processing, fermentation, roasting, grinding, frothing were likely widespread due to shared cultural heritage and extensive trade networks, regional variations in flavourings, consistency, and ritual usage were almost certainly present. Consider the availability of specific spices and flavourings. While chili peppers were ubiquitous, the types and intensity preferred might have varied. Perhaps the people of a coastal city-state, with easier access to marine resources, incorporated different local herbs, or even, hypothetically, a hint of sea salt into their cacao, a practice not unknown in modern artisanal chocolate to enhance flavour. Inland cities, nestled deeper in the rainforest, might have had privileged access to rare orchids for vanilla-like notes or specific chocolate flowers that didn't travel well. Think of it as local signature blends. You might hear a traveller remark, the chocolate in Yaxchilan, unmistakably robust, with a fiery kick of that local 7-pot chili, quite different from the delicately floral brew they serve in Copan. The desired consistency of the drink could also have been a point of regional distinction. Some kingdoms might have preferred their ceremonial cacao to be thick and rich, almost like a modern drinking chocolate or a dense porridge, achieved by adding a generous amount of finely ground maize. Others might have favoured a thinner, more watery consistency, perhaps focusing more on the purity of the cacao flavour itself and the delicacy of the froth. This could reflect local agricultural emphases, more maize available means more maize in the chocolate, or simply ingrained taste preferences passed down through generations within that particular kingdom. The artists depicting these scenes often show different vessel shapes and sizes being used, which might hint at different types of cacao drinks, potentially favoured in different regions, or for different purposes. A quirky tidbit is the potential for cacao snobbery, or regional pride linked to chocolate. Just as modern cities or countries boast about their unique culinary specialties, our pizza is the best, our coffee is superior, Maya city-states might have taken pride in their particular style of cacao. A lord from Palenque visiting Tikal might have politely sampled the local brew, while inwardly thinking, it's acceptable, but nothing like the perfectly balanced, twice frothed ambrosia we prepare back home with freshly picked cacawaxo chittle. Such subtle culinary rivalries are a very human trait, and it's amusing to imagine them playing out over cups of sacred chocolate millennia ago. There were no Yelp reviews, but word of mouth and courtly gossip probably served a similar function. Historians still argue about how much these regional variations were consciously cultivated as markers of identity versus being simply the result of local resource availability and uncoordinated tradition. Was a specific flavour profile actively promoted by a ruling lineage to distinguish their court and their city's cultural output? Or did these differences simply evolve organically over time? It's likely a combination of both. Glyphic evidence sometimes names specific types of cacao or cacao drinks, like util cacao, fruity cacao, or sack cacao, white cacao, possibly referring to a lighter roast or a specific varietal, and it's conceivable that certain kingdoms became renowned for their particular specialties. Perhaps traders sought out beans from a specific region known for its superior flavour, much like we prize single-origin coffees today. Furthermore, the specific ritual uses of cacao might have differed. While core offering practices were probably shared, a deity particularly prominent in one city-state might have received a cacao drink prepared in a very specific way, with unique ingredients deemed pleasing to that god, a recipe perhaps unknown or unused in a neighbouring kingdom that venerated a different pantheon or had different local cults. The stories and myths associated with cacao might also have had local inflections, influencing how it was perceived and utilised in rituals within that particular community. Imagine one kingdom associating cacao primarily with the maize god, emphasising its nourishing aspects, while another focused more on Ekchua, the merchant god, using cacao rituals to bless trade ventures and ensure prosperity. This tapestry of potential regional variations adds another layer of richness to our understanding of ancient Maya chocolate. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all beverage. It was a living tradition, adaptable and responsive to local environments, tastes, and beliefs. So, as you picture the vast Maya landscape, dotted with hundreds of city-states, each a vibrant centre of culture, remember that the cacao flowing through their ceremonial vessels and marketplaces likely shimmered with a fascinating spectrum of local flavours and meanings, a testament to the diverse ingenuity of the Maya people in honouring their food of the gods. Each kingdom likely whispered its own secrets into the froth surface of its sacred chocolate drink. As we approach the end of our journey through the ancient Maya world of chocolate, from its divine origins in the rainforest depths, to the intricately spiced and frothed elixirs enjoyed in palaces and temples, it's time to reflect on the enduring legacy of these practices. The specific ways the Maya cultivated, prepared, and revered cacao may have faded with the decline of their classic period civilization and the subsequent transformations wrought by conquest. But the echoes of their cacao traditions resonate powerfully even today, shaping how the entire world now experiences chocolate. You're now standing at a confluence of history, watching ancient streams flow into a vast global river. The most direct and obvious legacy is, of course, chocolate itself. While the sweet, solid bars we consume today are a far cry from the often bitter, spicy, frothy beverage of the Maya, the foundational ingredient, the processed cacao bean, remains the same. The fundamental steps of fermentation, drying, roasting, and grinding, all pioneered or perfected by Mesoamerican cultures like the Maya, are still at the heart of chocolate production worldwide. When European explorers first encountered cacao in the New World, they didn't invent chocolate. They stumbled upon a rich, complex tradition that had been flourishing for millennia. They were, in essence, introduced to a finished product, or at least a highly developed set of techniques for creating one. The mainstream historical fact is that European adoption and adaptation of cacao, and its subsequent spread across the globe, was built directly upon the agricultural and culinary innovations of the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica, including the Maya. Think about the global journey of the cacao bean after the Spanish conquest. The Spanish were initially perplexed by the bitter, spicy drink, but soon adapted it to their own tastes, crucially adding sugar, which they brought from the Old World, and warming spices like cinnamon and anise, rather than chili. They kept the frothing though, recognizing its appeal. For a long time, chocolate remained a Spanish secret, an aristocratic indulgence. But eventually, knowledge of it spread to other European courts, then to the burgeoning middle classes, and finally, with industrialization and innovations like the cocoa press, which could separate cocoa butter from cocoa powder, and the invention of solid chocolate, it became the globally accessible treat we know today. But every bite of a modern chocolate bar, every sip of hot cocoa, carries a faint genetic memory of those ancient Maya metates, those clay comals, those dramatic pouring rituals. The vocabulary we use around chocolate also bears witness to its Mesoamerican origins. The word chocolate itself is believed to derive from the Nahuatl, Aztec, word xocolatl, or choclatl, meaning bitter water, a term likely describing a beverage very similar to what the Maya consumed. The Maya word cacao or cacao is the ultimate root of cacao. These linguistic traces are like small signposts, pointing back to the heartland where this remarkable food was first cherished. Even some of our modern gourmet chocolate trends echo ancient Maya practices. The burgeoning interest in single origin, minimally processed, high cacao content dark chocolate, often featuring spices like chili or unexpected floral notes, is, in a way, a return to a more authentic, or at least historically informed way of appreciating cacao's complexities. The focus on terroir, the idea that beans from a specific region have a unique flavour profile, is something the Maya, with their potential regional cacao specialties, would have intuitively understood. Our craft chocolatiers, experimenting with savoury inclusions or unsweetened preparations, are, perhaps unknowingly, channeling a very ancient spirit of culinary adventure. The modern fascination with bean-to-bar chocolate making, emphasising the craft and control over every step from sourcing the bean to the final product, mirrors the hands-on, intimate relationship the Maya had with their cacao. A quirky tidbit of this legacy is the enduring ceremonial or ritualistic use of cacao in some indigenous communities in Mesoamerica today. While much has changed, vestiges of ancient practices survive. Some traditional communities still use cacao in offerings, in healing rituals, or during important community celebrations, maintaining a thread of continuity that stretches back for centuries, perhaps even millennia. These living traditions provide invaluable insights into the deeper meanings cacao held, meanings that are harder to excavate from archaeology alone. They remind us that cacao was never just a food. It was, and in some places still is, a spiritual and cultural cornerstone. Historians still argue about the exact nature and extent of Maya influence on later Aztec cacao practices, and then subsequently on European adaptations. While the Aztecs are often more famously associated with chocolate by the time of the conquest, largely because their empire was the dominant power the Spanish first encountered in central Mexico, they inherited and built upon a cacao tradition that had much deeper roots, significantly shaped by Maya civilization and other preceding cultures like the Olmec. The lines of influence are complex and interwoven, like the branches of a cacao tree itself. So, as you contemplate the end of this ancient Maya chocolate story, remember that it's not truly an ending, it's a transition. The sacred cacao of the Maya, once poured as libations to forest gods and sipped by divine kings from intricately painted vessels, has transformed. It has sweetened, solidified, and spread to every corner of the globe. It has become democratized, industrialized, and sometimes, sadly, rather blandly commercialized. But, within its very essence, it still carries the memory of the rainforest, the rhythm of the metate, the whisper of ancient chants, and the ingenuity of a people who recognized the divine in a humble bean. The rich, dark, frothed chocolate of the ancient Maya may seem a world away from a candy bar wrapper, but the connection is there, a testament to the enduring power of a truly remarkable food. And so, our slow journey through the humid air and fragrant kitchens of the ancient Maya draws to a gentle close. We've walked with you through shaded cacao groves, felt the warmth of the fermenting beans, heard the rhythmic scrape of the mano on the metate, and perhaps even imagined the tingle of chili on your tongue as you sipped that frothed divine elixir. The world of Maya chocolate, with its intricate preparations and deep spiritual significance, might seem distant now, separated by centuries and the profound shifts of history. Yet, the care, the reverence, the sheer artistry that the Maya brought to their cacao has left an indelible mark, a subtle flavour that lingers in the very fabric of our modern relationship with chocolate, even if we are often unaware of its ancient sacred roots. The voices of the Maya chocolate makers, the priests chanting over their offerings, the merchants counting out their precious bean currency, have long since faded into the mists of time. The grand cities where cacao was so central to elite life now stand as silent stone sentinels, gradually being reclaimed by the persistent embrace of the jungle. But the legacy of their ingenuity, their sophisticated understanding of botanical treasures, and their ability to transform a humble jungle fruit into a substance deemed worthy of gods and kings, that legacy continues to unfold with every chocolate bar unwrapped, every cup of cocoa sipped, in every corner of our interconnected world. It's a quiet testament to a civilization that understood the profound connections between the earth, the body, and the spirit. As you prepare to drift off now, perhaps you can imagine the gentle night sounds of a Maya village settling down, the last embers of the cooking fires glowing softly, the air still carrying the faint, comforting aroma of roasted cacao and wood smoke. The stars above, the same stars the Maya astronomers so diligently charted, blanket the sky in their silent, timeless majesty. Let the richness of their story, the gentle unfolding of their chocolate traditions, soothe your mind. Let the knowledge that even the most familiar things can have such deep and fascinating histories provide a sense of wonder and calm. There is comfort in the continuity of human endeavour, in the way ancient wisdom can subtly perfume our modern lives. The journey of cacao is a story of transformation, of connection, and ultimately of a simple pleasure that bridged the gap between the mundane and the divine. Allow these thoughts to gently cradle you as you ease into a peaceful, restorative sleep, carrying with you just a whisper of that ancient, sacred chocolate magic.